lot to talk about today. With what's been happening in the past week or so, we have seen continuously U.S. listed Chinese companies get involved into financial fraud, both self-reported but also being accused of by investors in the U.S. And this is becoming quickly not only a financial subject but also a reputational risk for many Chinese companies that are listed in the U.S. And we're talking about $1 trillion in size, thousands of companies being involved. And so let's give a shot at trying to put some narratives around this whole issue. How bad it is and what does it really mean?
The Luckin Coffee story is really huge because it kind of sets an example of how a company can really basically fake their sales, right? They faked their sales for 2019, now are in hot water, in hot coffee water, basically, with the CSRC, the China Securities and Regulatory Commission. But it's not really, the first big corporate scandal that we've seen in recent years. I mean, I'm thinking of Hanergy, for example, or H&A Group. But of course, this gives international advisors and investors a lot of stuff to talk about.
Mr. Yi, tell us what the U.S. Congress is feeding at this moment about Chinese listed companies in the U.S. Are they going to do something about it?
Sure. The U.S. Congress, well, not in an official sense because the CECC does not represent the U.S. Congress. It represents only its own independent view. But its finding nearly 2 years ago has warned the possibility of Luckin's case today. In particular, in that finding, we warned that because the egregious nature of fraudulent activity, including cooking the book, intellectual property theft, unfair trade practices by a number of Chinese national champions who are already public companies, not only in the US but also in Chinese own capital market, have created significant headaches that undermine the free trade principle and further undermine the American confidence in the integrity of the Chinese behaviors altogether. And that led to the US-China trade war about 18 months ago until the temporary ceasefire of the Phase 1 agreement. However, the U.S. Department of Justice has launched its China initiative against anti-bribery and unfair trade practices already. And then further, under the John McCain National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year of 2019, it is called the whole of government approach against fraudulent and egregiously predatory behaviors by Chinese companies. Therefore, the US government can not only have the ability to punish a non-compliant Chinese company in any conceivable manners, including delisting, but also initiating US-China government-to-government collaboration into such company, while giving this company some due process protection.
Let me ask you, so all foreign companies in the US that are listed, of course, have to have independent auditing firms as well. Now, with this new corporate scandal and this fraudulent activity of faking the sales of last year, what kind of message do you think does this send to foreign and international investors who were or still are interested in investing in Chinese companies?
I believe they should have their own confidence in Chinese companies who are willing to abide by the law and integrate themselves into the international market with the genuine shareholder value. So, for example, there are many outstanding Chinese companies like BYD that remains doing all the hard work. But there are also companies like Luckin and others who cook the book. So I would say that two things. First is that the confidence should be strengthened, because that means in the future, the target companies will no longer be those just raising money because of a good China story. They must present something harder and more solid. On the other hand, there will be good targets on the horizon after a cleanup that will be down the road a few years.
Well,
and then like a Enron case, post Enron, the U.S. capital market only became stronger. The U.S. capitalism became stronger. But between getting stronger and right now, it's a dark tunnel, and then lots of bad things could happen.
well,
So
it
that's
was,
my sense for investors.
So post Enron, there was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that supposedly, institutionalized the securities exchange and the auditing process, and so you would imagine that for this particular wave of fraudulent investigations, perhaps the Congress would step in and get intimately involved. And Don, I see you are sitting there. Going into this, I should say that you run TechNode, and you are right in the center of understanding and investigating, and I should say reporting all the Chinese tech companies in China. So you know about what's going on. What is the sentiment that you see in China at the moment from all the companies that are listed in the U.S.? Are they afraid? Do you think more fraudulent activities are going to be discovered? Is this the beginning of something that's worse coming?
I think this is really bad moment. Giving a few months back we have China-US trade war, then we have virus situation, then you have some people complain about China. Then right now come to the Luckin issue, and I think in China, I think it's really bad kind of impact to the kind of the ecosystem here. The first, I think the company listed already in US. I don't know, because if we hear today and yesterday, people has started a question about IPE and also several others, and also for other Chinese startups, they are dreaming to be listed in the US. I think they put a very big question mark, because because everything built on trust. So right now we are thinking, okay, because right now is the really complicated situation. I think the trust between China and US is kind of broken apart, and even and also for the Luckin problem, everybody say, okay, it is our issues. Okay, so report is on us. Then who can trust us in future? You know, we're doing a good job. So
it's also really bad timing for the coffee
exactly.
drinkers of China, because China only recently found appetite in drinking coffee, right? And if you look at the coffee market in China, Luckin Coffee has some 4,500 stores and coffee shops in China. This is really the rival to Starbucks, which has a couple of hundred less than that. So what will it mean for a coffee nation in the future?
For me, is it's really hard to say. I mean, it's definitely Luckin's fault, but as I said, from consumer, just as the Chinese consumer, I think the Luckin, they have this value, and I wouldn't say it's going to beat the Starbucks in China, but at least it make people's life a little easier, because I can order Luckin anywhere, anytime, and also the cheap is good for the consumers. And also, within just 1 year and a half, they built 4,000 shops. It's amazing. Then we were proud of kind of China speed, but now the China speed they come with lots of problems, which will impact all the ecosystem.
So this is one thing. This is one thing I don't understand, gentlemen. So over the past week, you got Luckin. Well, Luckin self-reported its own fraud, right? But within the past week, Luckin self-reported fraud, and then yesterday, TAL Education, Haweilai reported fraud, self-reported fraud, and then iQIYI all of a sudden was accused of fraud. And of course, iQIYI is a quarter of Baidu's revenue, so Baidu was affected. So I don't understand why within a week all these companies all of a sudden discovered that they had financial fraud. They have been running for years. Supposedly, no one discovered anything before, and all of a sudden now, why?
I think that's a 1 million question, and there are three aspects to answer your question from someone on the ground in China. First, number one is still from US because the US DOJ has initiated a program for self-disclosure, which means that so far from today, from about 2 months ago in January until about 18 months, if a company's compliance officers, internal audits, self-disclose problems to meet certain standards, then that company could have significant leniency, meaning that for maybe they could get away from a delisting or something even worse, such as trailing time for the CEO or co-founders. So from a career employee perspective, that's a bit incentive for the corporate officers within these Chinese public companies to comply with the US authorities, because that would save that would cover their own ass, because they could find a job elsewhere, and their tenure and their experience is for US listed companies, and they would have a very hard time if they didn't do it, because they could become adding and abetting, and there could be joint and several liability with their co-founders. So that's a number one incentive from a employee perspective. They want to have future job security, and then the U.S. regulators only give them 1 year or 18 months or even shorter for self-disclosure, and that's a very important incentive. And number two is that there has been many rumors in the past. However, it's not the mainstream reports. The mainstream reports is about U.S.-China trade war, and then the best ever U.S. economic and capital market boom in the past 18 months. So those news actually were popping up, but not kind of catching a lot of attention. So things has been emerging, and then this is just the tip of the iceberg for a very long time. And the third reason is for the intensity of such activities is because of the companies of their own nature. As you know, TAO or Luckin, they are still very good companies to many Chinese standards, because there are many others who were or are even much worse.
Now, the CSRC, the Chinese regulatory body, the China Securities and Regulatory Commission, of course, is launching a investigation. But do you think that in general there should be more internal auditing investigations in China as well?
Yes, and also that you alluded to my third point, because the China has, if you remember, that China just launched its whole Chinese Discipline Commission, which is kind of parallel to State Council by President Xi Jinping as a part of his anti-bribery campaign. And then with the launch of this authority, it will mean also Chinese own investigation, as you mentioned. So Chinese government also take a very keen interest to investigate than before. In the past, a kind of news in US might not kind of has any ripple in China. However, a significant kind of security fraud or alleged in US market like Luckin's could also stir another separate investigation in China as well. And a lot of companies also are given orders to enhance their audits at this moment, to ensure that they also cooperate with the Chinese authorities. And that's also a very good outcome from the Phase 1 US-China agreement, in which it encourages collaboration between the two regulators. And it also gives the US investors, for the first time, 100% ownership for security and asset management companies in China, which means that even if Luckin got delisted in US, American investors would have a much better say with their own WUFI, with their own wholly owned entity in China to invest into Chinese capital market for better quality targets. And as such, there's a kind of movement by a number of forces at this moment, and they all come to the crossroad to push to the intensity first of the investigations in US, and then very soon also in China as well. So that's from my personal observation from the ground.
Do you
Yes.
actually believe that CSRC and ICC will be working together on this?
Well, China just released its blocking statute, which means that American investigators and US regulators can't just come into China and take their position and take their suspects all the way, like FBI did in the US. They have to cooperate with the Chinese security regulators as well. So I would anticipate more talks between the two regulators, and in terms of sharing and also separate but collaborative investigations into companies, especially companies with maybe not listed in one country, but companies whose owners and co-founders and significant shareholders has a number of holdings in the public companies in both US, Hong Kong, and US. For example, in the Luckin case, the market water reports pointed out not only Luckin's own cooking book, but also its founders' allegedly fraudulent activities in both US and China, and also in another public company in Hong Kong. So I would anticipate that the security regulators in Beijing and Hong Kong will not just sit there. They will be actively monitoring the situation, and they have their discretion to initiate their own investigation. And this is, by the way, this is part of their sovereignty, and they are part of their job.
And China takes it very seriously. So, Gang, you just talked about this is obviously, a very chilling situation for all the Chinese companies, particularly tech companies who are looking to get listed in the United States. Now, I would imagine if they go on roadshows and try to get listed now, not only coronavirus is impacting investment interest, but also just the sort of distrust of the Chinese companies' financials is gonna. But is this? Are you alluding that this may be the end of many Chinese companies' road to IPO in the United States?
Yeah, hopefully. Well, I think it's getting very difficult. But on the other side, I could start from last year. The Chinese government actually also encouraged the Chinese companies to be listed in China, China Hong Kong. So I think it really depends. I think maybe the biggest impact is we see more actually. With this trend, we see more and more Chinese companies become very global. They want to target at the global market. I think for those companies, I think could be is not really good news, because if you go global, of course the best destination is US market. They want to be IPO to have more like global kind of exposure or influence. But now, I think it's become very tricky. For China company, I think it should be okay and safe to be listed in China, but no way to be global if we're just in China, right? So yeah. So actually, I have a question to Mr. Wang Yi as well. I don't know if it's a good question to ask. And how do you think what will happen to Luckin in the end? And also, what do you think will be in the near future? We'll see another Luckin and come with the same stories. And because here, I was talking to some Chinese VCs. I cannot say the name, but I think all of them kind of think Luckin might not be the last case. It might be more Chinese listed company, USD company kind of explodes.
And how we can avoid that from happening?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your question. For the first question about what it would end, I would say it's actually a very good thing for Luckin's management team, because it gives them a chance to restructure the company, and if necessary, they have the incentive to delist and go private, and they can come back with a much healthy and more compliant image later on.
Would this be
Because,
your advice to delist now and go private?
well, I'm not a prophet to know the future, but I would say that if that's the only choices to protect their shareholder value, perhaps they will do so, because there was a precedent back about 2010. There was also a Chinese company listed in Nasdaq in the petrochemical industry, and that company faced the same dilemma. Eventually, the company's chief legal officer resigned, and then they published the compensation is that the company's board determined that any further FCPA investigation into the company will result in diminishing its shareholder value. And then the question in the compliance community in the past 10 years has been discussing what means shareholder value eventually. Does the compliance mean the end of the story? Or compliance means that there could be a good business? Yes, exactly. So I would say that I would hope that Luckin and their counsel would work very closely and in a very forthcoming and cooperative manner with the U.S. regulators to clean up the company, and if necessary, with certain buyback and support from any white knight investors for this company, and change its entire ownership as well as management, if necessary, in order to comply with the U.S. security regulation to stay as a public company or get private for a while and come back as a decent company. And I believe they have the ability to do so, because they have the courage right now to choose the path that's very challenging to disclose their own misconduct. And I think that's also for the first time. If you look at the many outstanding Chinese companies, I think this is a very good start for a newer generation of management. And so my fingers are all crossed for Luckin.
And toes as well. Gang, of course, you work a lot with tech startups, in this ecosystem. And many, of course, when you start an enterprise and a business, you're totally enthusiastic and motivated, want to get going and kick off. But do you think that there should be more legal education as well? Because many of these young players, they might not be fully aware of the legal risks when they scale up in China, and then also when they grow, get bigger, and want to do a listing and do an IPO overseas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think to me, I think definitely maybe I think in China is like the very wild market. Like we move so fast. And just give an example is I was talking to a conference, for in US and somewhere else, we see the value from the incubator or accelerator, because we know what's the value we can bring, the mentors can bring. But in China, we don't really believe in accelerator or mentors or incubators, because we don't really see the models. Not that many mentors can really guide us, give a lesson or give all the lessons all the ways. So I think definitely right. I think it's wide market, but it's getting more and more mature. Then we should do more for the founders, and we should be ready for everything. And also, it's very important. It's been many years, I think, for Chinese founders and also Chinese investors. The ultimate goal for all startups, because when you talk to a startup, they are small and they can tell you the dream, say, oh, we want to be IPO someday. It's quite different from Silicon Valley, from what I see. From Silicon Valley people, the founders, they're doing that for fun. They're doing it to change the world, but they're not really doing it for IPO. But in China, the lots of cases, from the first day the company started, the only one kind of a destination is IPO. I wouldn't say it's not right, but I don't think it's not IPO is not everything.
It's not the end of all goals.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Well, you bring out, and also Martina, this is a very important corporate governance issue, because Chinese companies, they don't want to involve mentors. They don't like to listen to advice from the independent directors either. And I mean, when Chinese companies need to be listed overseas, not only in the US but all over the world, they need to abide by very stringent international corporate governance standards. And I oftentimes think from my personal experience, a lot of the US listed Chinese companies, the founders happen to be the largest shareholders. And like what he said, to protect shareholder value. If I'm the founder and the largest shareholder, I'm protecting my own value primarily. What about the small investors out there? It's the independent director's responsibility to protect the minority shareholders. And in Chinese system, we don't see a lot of very vocal independent directors. And as you said, founders don't like to listen to advice, and then there could be a potential problem. And so I think it's not only just the maturity of the legal understanding, but also I think it's very important that China needs to bring to the agenda all across the corporate space, in the public space, to upgrade the corporate governance standard and fiduciary responsibility education of all the independent directors of these companies, because they are crucial. It's the lack of fiduciary responsibility. And I would even go back to your original proposition. In the U.S., if an American company is covered this sort of fraud, it's very common sense to understand. A couple of CXOs, chief executives at certain areas, is going to resign. A couple of board of directors might resign because of this. And in China, so far for Luckin, we do not see that, right? The founders are the largest shareholders, are essentially running the show. This is still a young company. I mean, if they resign, who's going to run the company?
You're asking my personal opinion or from a legal perspective?
Both.
I can give you both. As a friend to many entrepreneurs who also, like Gang mentioned, dream for IPOs, that has been the conversation. How to, in Chinese word, they always say that how you stand there and still get the money in China. Is it a total? So it has been a conversation, and you are true. It's very true that the change of the founder could mean the collapse of an entire startup, and in many cases it was such ending of the story. However, I do believe that they are not that the case, because I increasingly see in the incubators I work with, increasingly see very good startups whose co-founders are from Big Four, or some startups has their CTO or COO or CMO who had significant actually compliance background, not like me as an attorney, but involved in their Fortune 500 companies involved, and know that the compliance has been very important in their vendor vetting process, in their corporate financing activities. So I increasingly see this generation of entrepreneurs. I do believe that if something was wrong with the key founder, it would be the end of the story. Rather, I would say that the more coaching would take place. And then sometimes it just takes us a company to hit the wall before people really get awakened for the good corporate governance you mentioned, to the same degree as it enjoys in the US. But I do believe that direction could be accelerated because of the Luckin's case.
And guys, this brings me to another point, talking about the corporate governance. So if we look at the boards of directors, not just of Chinese and Western companies, but also international banks, multinationals, and so on, there has been, of course, a glass ceiling, a bamboo ceiling, we call it in Asia and in China, but not just for women, but we should also really internationalize the boards of directors. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, the Swiss banking giant UBS appointed its first Chinese director of the board, Fred Hu from Primavera Capital. That was a big move. Of course, there are interests as well to expand the market share in China, so there are some hidden interests, of course, as well. But then also looking at Chinese companies. If we take, for example, Wanda or Fosun, they are all, with Chinese people on the boards of directors. So I think also we should have more international faces on all of the companies, whether it's China or in the West, to make sure that we exchange experiences and make sure, that the legal standards are also respected worldwide.
So, Gang, I have another question for you. For Luckin's case, in reading primarily, the Muddy Waters financial disclosures, the company has significantly underestimated its marketing cost, particularly on this mobile apps, etc. And so, on a per unit coffee sales basis, they estimated that the coffee doesn't really make any money. We don't know if that's true or not. So, but that says something very significant, because Starbucks doesn't sell a cup of coffee, not making money. But Luckin, a company like Luckin, could afford to sell a cup of coffee, not making a profit. And also companies like Chinese version of Uber, Didi. Didi has been, in the talks of potentially IPOing in overseas for a long time. Apple is an investor of Didi. Does Didi actually make money? I mean, what we have seen over the past few years, one thing is that the Chinese speed of technological rise. The other thing is a lot of these Chinese companies, they use capital raising, rounds after rounds of finance expansion, and not worried about making money. Is that sustainable? I mean, what's going to happen next to companies even like Didi?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question, but I think I don't really have I don't have answer. I think that will continue. I think it's I don't know it's a good thing or bad thing, but there's so many Chinese companies. I think that making money or having profit, it seems not really like the number one kind of criteria for to build a great company. Because so many cases, like even the JD make money, making profit right now. There's so many cases. Is we always look at in China, we always look at the speed or scale of the company, at least in the internet space, right? Then I think for some reason we kind of forget about profitable or not profitable. It doesn't really matter. We are really looking at the number of the user base or the revenue base, not the profit base. So I think that's a give kind of I don't know. That's a give maybe the impression for lots of founders. Scalable is the most important thing. We should raise more money to be scalable.
But that's considering, given the understanding that capital market and private equity space is abundant. But now when capital market private equity is drying up, what are these companies going to do?
I would say, yes, emulation of it, like an investigation, but also emulation in terms of shareholder value, the sense of shareholder value as well.